Good evening. Tonight, an extraordinary and potentially consequential moment in the war in Ukraine. Not a dramatic battlefield breakthrough, not a formal peace conference, but a series of calculated moves and countermoves that may mark a turning point in how this war is prosecuted, how it is sustained, and how it may ultimately be brought to an end. This is about pressure. Political pressure, military pressure, economic pressure, and the way it is now converging on the Kremlin from Washington and Kyiv at the same time. Late this week, President Vladimir Putin authorized what Russian officials are calling a defensive adjustment to Russia's posture in occupied Ukrainian territory. The wording is deliberate. It is designed to sound technical, routine, even cautious. But read closely and the implications are much larger. The move includes a redeployment of air defense assets, expanded authority for regional military commanders, and new rules governing strikes against what Moscow defines as external enablers of Ukrainian attacks. That phrase, external enablers, is doing a lot of work. In Washington and Kyiv, it is being interpreted as a signal and possibly a warning. Ukrainian officials responded almost immediately, not with panic, but with clarity. The president's office in Kyiv released a statement reaffirming Ukraine's right to strike military targets used to attack its cities, regardless of where those targets are located. Western diplomats, briefed on the matter, say Kyiv coordinated its response carefully with allies, especially the United States. The message was unmistakable. Ukraine will not be deterred, and it will not be isolated.
Rachel Maddow. In Washington, the reaction was equally measured and equally firm. Senior U.S. officials confirmed that the administration views Russia's move as an attempt to change the rules of engagement without changing the underlying reality on the ground. One official described it as strategic theater, meant to project strength at a moment when Moscow is facing mounting constraints. Another was more blunt. This doesn't intimidate us, it clarifies what comes next. So what does come next? According to multiple sources familiar with internal deliberations, the United States is preparing to signal a new phase of support for Ukraine, one that emphasizes sustainability over symbolism, endurance over escalation. This includes longer-term security assistance packages, expanded training programs, and deeper integration of Ukrainian defense planning with NATO standards. Not NATO membership, not yet, but something closer than ever before. To understand why this moment matters, we need to step back and look at the broader arc of the war. For more than 2 years, Russia has sought to wear Ukraine down through attrition. Missiles against infrastructure, drones against cities, manpower against trenches. Ukraine, backed by Western aid, has responded with resilience and intervention, using precision strikes, intelligence sharing, and asymmetric tactics to blunt Russia's advantages. The result has been a grinding stalemate, punctuated by sudden shocks. What has changed recently is the political context. In Moscow, the costs of the war are becoming harder to conceal. Sanctions have not collapsed the Russian economy, but they have narrowed its options. Defense spending now consumes a staggering share of the federal budget. Regional governments are straining to meet recruitment quotas. And while state media continues to project confidence, independent reporting and leaked data tell a more complicated story. At the same time, Ukraine has demonstrated a growing ability to strike targets once considered out of reach. Energy infrastructure, logistics hubs, and command centers deep behind Russian lines have come under attack. Each strike carries both military and psychological weight. They signal to Moscow that distance no longer guarantees safety, and to Western allies that Ukrainian capabilities are evolving. This is the context in which Putin's new move must be understood. It is not simply about air defenses or command authority. It is about signaling, to his own elite, to his military, and to the outside world, that Russia retains escalation options. But signaling cuts both ways. By drawing attention to these options, Moscow invites scrutiny and response. In Washington, that response is taking shape across multiple fronts. First, there is the diplomatic front. U.S. officials are intensifying consultations with European allies, particularly those on NATO's eastern flank. The goal is alignment, ensuring that any Russian attempt to redefine red lines is met with a unified Western position. Unity, officials say, remains the most effective deterrent. Second, there is the military assistance front. While specific details remain classified, sources indicate that upcoming aid packages will prioritize air defense, counter-drone capabilities, and long-range fires. The emphasis is on protecting Ukrainian civilians and enabling Ukraine to hold territory, not on dramatic offensives that could provoke unpredictable escalation. It is a strategy of denial rather than domination. Third, there is the economic front. The administration is working with partners to tighten enforcement of existing sanctions, targeting loopholes and intermediaries that have allowed Russia to acquire restricted technologies. This is not about new headline-grabbing sanctions, but about making existing ones bite harder. Quiet pressure, applied consistently. Ukraine, for its part, is navigating this moment with a combination of urgency and restraint. Ukrainian leaders understand that their leverage depends not only on battlefield performance, but on maintaining Western support. That means avoiding actions that could fracture the coalition, even as they push for greater freedom of action. It is a delicate balance. Ukrainian military officials say the new Russian posture does not fundamentally alter their operational plans. "We adapt every day," one senior officer said. "This war has taught us that no declaration from Moscow changes the facts on the ground." But privately, there is recognition that the stakes are rising. Each move is now layered with diplomatic consequence. The human cost of this dynamic is never far from view. Even as officials debate strategy, Ukrainian cities continue to face nightly drone attacks. Air raid sirens, power outages, and shattered neighborhoods are part of daily life. In Russia, too, border regions have experienced disruptions, prompting questions among ordinary citizens about the war's trajectory. These lived experiences shape public opinion in ways that official statements cannot fully control. For President Putin, the challenge is maintaining control of the narrative while managing an increasingly complex reality. His authority remains strong, but it is not immune to pressure. History shows that prolonged conflicts, especially those framed as existential, tend to narrow leaders' room for maneuver. Compromise becomes politically risky. Escalation becomes tempting. That is precisely what Washington and Kyiv are trying to prevent. The goal is not to corner Putin into a reckless move, but to constrain his options until a negotiated outcome becomes preferable to continued war. This is pressure with a purpose, not pressure for its own sake. Still, there are risks. Miscalculation remains the ever-present danger. A misinterpreted strike, a misread signal, a domestic political shock, any of these could accelerate events beyond anyone's control. U.S. officials emphasize that communication channels with Moscow remain open, even as public rhetoric hardens. Quiet diplomacy continues alongside public resolve. As this new phase unfolds, attention will turn to several key indicators. Will Russia follow through on its implied warnings, or will the move remain largely symbolic? Will the United States formalize its next steps in a way that reassures allies without provoking adversaries? And will Ukraine be able to sustain its defense through another difficult season? What is clear tonight is that the war has entered a more complex and potentially decisive chapter. The lines between military action and political signaling are increasingly blurred. Each announcement is both a message and a test. Each response sets the stage for the next move.
In moments like this, it is tempting to look for a single dramatic turning point, a speech, a summit, a ceasefire. But history suggests that wars often turn not on a single event, but on the accumulation of pressures that slowly reshape incentives. That appears to be what is happening now. Putin's new move was intended to project strength. Instead, it has sharpened focus on Russia's vulnerabilities and accelerated coordination among its opponents. Washington's signal of a next step is not about escalation, but about endurance, about making clear that time will not deliver Moscow the victory it seeks. For Ukraine, the message is one of conditional reassurance, continued support, continued partnership, continued expectation of reform and restraint. For Russia, the message is equally clear. Attempts to intimidate will be met with resolve, not retreat. As the night goes on, decisions made in secure rooms in Moscow, Kyiv, and Washington will ripple outward, affecting millions of lives. The outcome is not predetermined, but the direction of travel, at least for now, is unmistakable. Pressure is building, options are narrowing, and the next step, whatever form it takes, will matter. We will continue to follow this story closely, watching not just what is said, but what is done. Because in this war, as in so many others, the most important signals are often the quietest ones, and the consequences of ignoring them can be profound.